When we walked onto the campus the first time, we were surrounded by students screaming at us.
We favor segregated schools.
I felt like it was the right thing to do, but also the right time.
And at the right time, I think the five of us were the right people.
My mom convinced me that someone had to be the first black to go over.
I never really thought about UGA football until I began to be recruited by them.
We became a family, the five of us, after we first got there.
That was the key, being able to support each other when things are not going well.
The role that I was playing that was bigger than just football. We were setting the stage for others to come.
The incredible barrier these guys broke. They laid the foundation of what it is to be a part of this program.
On most Saturdays in the fall, Sanford Stadium comes alive. You can hear the roar of Bulldog fans from miles away. The crowd, the band, the players, it's all a part of the long and rich tradition that is University of Georgia football. But for decades, this tradition included one more: denying black players a chance to wear the red and black. In fact, the SEC was the last conference to integrate its teams. Kentucky, Tennessee, Florida, these colleges and several others finally integrated their teams in the late 60s and in 1970. Then, in 1971, a decade after two students in a bitter legal battle desegregated the University of Georgia, 5 young men walked onto this field and into history. Richard Appleby, Horace King, Clarence Pope, Chuck Kinnebrew, and Larry West. This is their story, a story that changed Bulldog Nation.
I felt like it was the right thing to do, but also the right time.
And the right players, as one of the 5 who broke UGA's color barrier tells it. It was these 5 men, the first 5.
We just came along at the right time. And at the right time, I think the 5 of us were the right people.
50 years ago, Appleby, King, Kinnebrew, Pope, and West signed on to play between the hedges.
I think that Coach Dooley probably was a man or a coach before his own time. He came along, and again, I think he knew exactly what he was looking for in terms of people's attitudes and their ability to perform not just on the football field, but in the classroom and beyond. I think he got what he was looking for.
It took some time. Throughout the 1960s, teams around the nation began to recruit and include black players on their rosters, including the University of Missouri, who played Georgia in the 1960 Orange Bowl.
The political situation in Georgia now, it was pretty hot. So many people did not want to integrate. So many people fought it. So many people were entrenched. We're not going to do it. We're going to wave the Confederate flag, and we're not going to give in.
UGA was one of the last SEC schools to include black players on its varsity team. The conference's northernmost school, the University of Kentucky, was the first. SEC Network college football analyst Tony Barnhart knows the game and the Bulldogs. He graduated from UGA in 1976.
Nate Northington had already signed, and Greg Page had already signed at Kentucky in 1966, and they played in 1967. So everybody could see that the world was changing.
One of UGA's fiercest rivals, the University of Alabama, had integrated its team by 1970, a year before the first 5 joined the UGA football team. Barnhart remembers the pivotal game in 1970 that brought attention to the issue.
The people who were on the fence when it came to integrating the football team were no longer, after you get beat 42-21, you're no longer on the fence.
42-21, that was the final score, largely due to this man, the University of Southern California's Sam Cunningham, a black player who ran through Bear Bryant's Alabama defense.
But there's no question that the loss to USC in Birmingham opened a lot of eyes.
At the University of Georgia, Athens native Kenneth Dias was the first to try to open the door during a UGA spring G-Day game much like this one. 5 years before the first 5 joined the Bulldogs, Dias walked on to the team.
And I had a friend of mine that had already started attending UGA. He was in high school with me, my high school class. And he said, we're going to break this color barrier. We're going to go out for the football team. Of course, we went to see Vince Dooley and told him that we were coming up with the football team in the spring of 1966, spring practice.
But Dias had a lingering knee injury. He said it was clear he'd never play varsity and soon left the team. A few months later, in the fall of 1967, another black player, James Hurley, walked onto Georgia's freshman team as a defensive end.
And I really liked the way he practiced. I liked him as a person. But then I was looking forward to having him come back. And then I found out that he ended up going to Vanderbilt.
It wasn't unusual for players to show up in the spring and not return in the fall. This pattern continued with John King, a fullback linebacker from Huntsville, Alabama. He was the first black player to actually sign with UGA, the season before the first 5 arrived in 1971.
As it turned out, we got our first introduction to recruiting against Big Ten schools. So Minnesota, during the summertime and the spring, had recruited this player from Huntsville. And before we knew it, he had signed a national letter. So we were disappointed, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen the next year.
The time to sign the first 5 seemed right to Dooley because of another development, the integration of high school football in Georgia in the mid to late 1960s.
That made it easier with the players, with the fans, because most all the fans came from some town that they were proud of. And when there was integration there, and then the black players performed an important part of the team, then they knew that it would be helpful to the football team.
Appleby, King, and Pope were seniors at Clark Central High School in Athens the year it became an integrated school. The transition was a challenge.
I was proud of being a part of a completely black institution when I went to Burnt Harris High School. Really would love to have graduated from Burnt Harris High School. Most of us wanted nothing to do with that integration situation, though I think it turned out for some of us pretty good.
When we first went to Clark Central, we had a coach. He really couldn't grasp the idea of trying to coach, black players, and he made it known in newspapers and all of that. And so we knew that we were going into sort of a hostile situation.
Pope said that they were able to manage difficulties because they had the community, their parents, and their former coaches behind them.
It was a process of a lot of racial concerns, and the entire community were drawn together to be able to solve those particular problems.
Larry West was among the first to integrate 2 local schools, Mary Acres Junior High and Albany High School in Albany, Georgia.
If you came to the team and you performed, that you were more readily accepted. Now, that doesn't mean that you weren't still held at hand's length, but you understood and you adapted to that.
Chuck Kinnebrew attended West Rome High School, which began desegregating in the late 60s.
Being the first to integrate, you get a chance to experience what racism is all about, directly and indirectly. The good thing for me is that I was pretty big, and so it didn't last very long, which was good. Because I think once the kids saw that we were kids like anybody else, just a difference in skin color, then I think things started to relax a lot more, and you didn't get the little the racial nudges that you would see.
Although each of the first 5 had dealt with the first of integration prior to UGA, it was still a big decision to commit to a college in the Deep South.
I really didn't make that choice. My mother did. For some reason, I was kind of leaning on not wanting to go to school in Athens. And more because of the little skirmishes that went on, We didn't have a whole lot of conversation. My mother just came and sit down after we had met with Coach Dooley and a couple of the coaches that was recruiting me, and said, it seems like a good place to me to go to school.
Dooley did not set out to recruit only in-state players, but location played a role in the players' decisions. When Kinnebrew was in grade school, he and his dad once were playing with a tape recorder. His dad pretended to be a reporter interviewing Kinnebrew. One of his questions was about being one of the first African Americans to play football at UGA.
Lo and behold, the night before I made a decision, he tried to play that tape. It wasn't, you couldn't tell what I was saying and everything. But it just reminded me of their wishes. And my parents did a phenomenal job taking care of me, and that was the least I could do.
Appleby was interested in going to Tuskegee Institute before he committed to UGA.
Actually, I did not want to go to the University of Georgia, but my mom convinced me that someone had to be the first black to go over.
Appleby, King, and Pope knew each other from high school, and West reached out to Kinnebrew before they moved to Athens.
I talked to him by phone, and I had already made my decision to go ahead and go to the university. And then I had a chance to talk with Chuck. So I said, man, let's go ahead and do this thing. And so we did.
Although the transition would be tough, Appleby knew they would need to give it their all and rely on their support system.
Our mindset was to go over, try as hard as we could. We had the support of the whole black community behind us. Everybody was pulling for us, so it made it a little bit easier to go over and give it everything you had.
In 1971, the first 5 stepped onto campus, becoming the first black football players to play between these hedges. Even though UGA was one of the last SEC colleges to integrate, it did not make it easy. Jack Sadegan explores the first 5's experiences between these hedges and in the classroom as they paved the way for other black students and athletes at UGA.
You're exposing kids from South Georgia who've never played football with blacks, and so this was their first time, and there was some degree of racism. Plus, I remember the first week we arrived, we went through a process where there was a grand dragon, and you had to stand up and chew tobacco and all that kind of stuff.
Clarence Pope has his memories too.
Your first freshman day there. And you see the individual dressed up in the KKK garb, and you see other individuals with bandoleros, and it seems like something out of a movie. And then they initiate the hazing process of, I want you to bow down before the Grand Poobah. That's what they call it, the Grand Poobah.
The first 5 depended on Coach Dooley to have their backs.
I heard some things that I just didn't like. I mean, it could have been, I would not have liked that among any of the players, black or white or whatever. And I would have had a come to the head coach meeting with those individuals, the team.
In addition to dealing with the racial tensions, the first 5 needed to adapt to the isolation and demands of college football.
In high school, I was like a lot of guys. I was such a really good football player, I don't think I spent nearly as much time in the classroom. Being ineligible, going to the university for the first year, I had to hit the books.
The first 5 roomed together in McWhorter Hall and leaned on each other for support.
We became a family, the 5 of us, after we first got there. The support came from each other.
The first 5 then started getting attention on the field.
I think it had gotten to a point where people realized that we were humans, just like they were. We were on the same team. We need to play together. And so that type of camaraderie sort of took over.
One player stood out.
We had a saying, just get the ball to Horace.
And give him the ball they did. Horace King became the first African American to start for Georgia against North Carolina State in 1972. He scored another first in that game, the first UGA touchdown by a black player.
I made the statement that I just did that to help them win. And them was me.
King began to dominate at Georgia, racking up nearly 1,300 rushing yards and 19 touchdowns from 1972 to 1974. Then there was this man, Chuck Kinnebrew, who became a force on the defensive line. Another was Richard Appleby, who set in motion a college career with more than 900 yards receiving in 3 seasons. But it was one play that many fans still remember 1975, the iconic annual Georgia-Florida game. Florida heavily favored in beating the Dogs 7-3 when this happened.
4-3 defense. Matt Robinson fakes. End around to Appleby. Appleby's going to throw a bomb. He's got a man open down to the far side. Complete. A long touchdown. A touchdown. Appleby to Washington. 80 yards.
They had one of the first huge screen projection TVs and had it on in the bar. The place was packed. And when Appleby threw to Washington for 80 yards, they darn near tore the place down. It was incredible. I will never forget it.
Georgia held on to win 10-7, ending Florida's chances at a first ever Southeastern Conference championship. Every one of the first 5 played during the 1973 season, which ended with Georgia winning the Peach Bowl against Maryland. But despite the progress on the field, there was still much to be done off of it.
You know, it was a process. And that process was year after year.
Dooley remembers calling a team meeting in 1972 or 73.
I brought the whole team together and felt like that we needed to get things off their chest, that there was some issues with each other, and it turned out to be a very helpful experience for me and for the whole football team and the coaching staff.
The first 5 often credit Dooley for supporting them with an open-door policy.
From a moral standpoint, we saw things that were happening that we didn't really appreciate, and we just wanted to bring it to his attention, and as a result of that, some of those things came to a screeching halt.
Appleby adds that Dooley's approach is what made the difference.
As far as we was concerned, it was Coach Dooley that made the whole thing work because nobody had ever dealt with it before, and it was all based on how he would respond. And he responded in a positive way, so it made it easy for everybody.
The first 5 were impacting Georgia football, but it did not come without struggles.
Well, by the time I was a junior, I lost my drive and I lost my discipline. And without drive and discipline, it's very difficult to achieve major things.
We had a pool table in the dorm, and basically that's what I played solitaire, and I would play pool against myself, and it was a pretty trying times at times. It was low times.
Once again, they leaned on each other.
I'm so glad that we were as close as we were, because at some point you do have to get out of that mud. You do have to wash yourself off. You do have to pick yourself up and then go on with your life. And that's exactly what they helped me do.
Today, it's evident the first 5 made a tremendous impact on the future of Georgia football, including lifelong friendships. One started when Georgia tight end John Gurley's mom sat near King's mom at a game.
And my mom and his mom became good friends. They would sit in the stands together, and there were, white lady from suburban Atlanta and black lady from Athens, and completely different paths, but look what brought them together.
King and Gurley remain friends to this day.
We figured out that real quick that Horace wasn't ever going to be white. I was never going to be black, but we celebrated the differences. We didn't make them anything to divide about. We just had a mutual respect, and I think athletics had a lot to do with that.
That lifelong friendship was one blessing.
I thoroughly enjoyed the 4 years that I spent down the campus of the University of Georgia. It's some special moments there inside of me that I will always cherish.
Didn't have to be me. Could have been anyone. I look back and I said, well, it's only history, but, my name goes down in history.
And that history still impacts the team today.
To see the number of African-American men that are on the team now, that are on the coaching staff now, that's a part of the university now, and to see the number of African-American students that are walking all across the campus now, that are involved in every school across the University of Georgia spectrum now is phenomenal. And I'd like to think that we had a little bit to do with that. And I'm just grateful.
The success of the first five pushed for change. Changes on the field, in the classroom, and in the lives of university students. That push for change inspired other Black students to follow them here. Danye Traylor introduces you to some of those whose lives were changed off the field because of these barrier breakers.
I was the only Black person in the Georgia crowd.
Harold Black smiles as he remembers that day in 1965. The day during his junior year at UGA when he traveled to Ann Arbor to cheer for the Bulldogs against the University of Michigan.
When I got back to campus, I had about 20 telephone messages from my mother. I called her and she said, "We saw you on TV." Because one Black face wearing Georgia stuff, carrying a sign that said, "Go Dogs," she said I got more FaceTime than the football team.
The trip was memorable for another couple of reasons. One, it was the only time in his 4 years at UGA that he saw Black athletes on the same field as the Bulldogs, because Michigan's team was already integrated. Another,
I went along with a group of my friends. We actually went into a Denny's to eat breakfast, and that was the first time we could eat together as a group off of campus because Athens was still segregated.
However, as of 1961, following the admission of Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes, the UGA campus was desegregated. That inspired Black to push for change.
I actually went to the athletics director, his name was Joel Eves, several times, and actually one time camped out at his office because he kept telling me to get out of his office. Because I was asking him to go out, since there were Black students, I would go and I would say, "They're Black students, why don't you go recruit Black athletes?"
It would take at least 5 more years after Harold Black became the first Black graduate from UGA's business school in 1966 for him to see his wish come true. Michael Thurman knew the men who would make it happen.
So it was just an amazing moment.
Today, Thurman is the Chief Executive Officer of DeKalb County, the first African American elected to a statewide office without prior appointment. Years ago, he attended school in Athens, Georgia, at the all-Black Bernie Harris High School. There, he played football with 3 of the first 5 against bitter crosstown rival, all-white Athens High.
You felt like you were literally representing your race on the football field.
Bernie Harris merged with Athens High in 1971 to form Clark Central High School. The first graduating class included 4 members of the newly integrated high school football team: Michael Thurman, Horace King, Richard Appleby, and Clarence Pope.
So it was a lot for young children, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who were bearing the burden of changing decades of history in Clark County, in the state of Georgia.
In the fall of 1971, 3 of Thurman's teammates, Appleby, King, and Pope, were the first Black players to wear the UGA football uniform.
All the years during my life, we hadn't anticipated that it would be classmates and friends. So I was proud of them and very excited about what they would be able to do once they put on the red and black.
1971 was also the year the UGA band dropped the word Dixie from the name of the band and decided to stop playing the song Dixie, an unofficial anthem of the Confederacy. Although ultimately it was not his decision, Bulldogs head football coach Vince Dooley knew the decision was a big one. When deciding whether to support the band director, he went to someone he trusted.
Fortunately, I had some close to the team. In this case, his name was Squab. Squab was quote, the water boy, as they called him in those days.
Squab's real name? Harry Jones, and he was also the team's equipment manager. In this 1976 interview, he speaks with former Bulldog great Fran Tarkenton.
Squabby, how long have you been here?
Well, I started
1910 when I was 8 years old, up that Huddy Field.
Back in 1971, he and Dooley spoke about the band changing its name.
When that issue came up, I talked to Squab. I had confidence that he had an objective view, but he felt like that in this case that it should be changed. And respecting him as I did, then I was very supportive of it.
Dooley expected a negative reaction from some fans.
But I certainly knew the reaction of many of our supporters, which was not in favor of making the change.
After Roger Dance, UGA band director for nearly 40 years, made the final decision to drop the term, his son, Steve Dance, remembers what happened to his family next.
There would be people that would, bring Confederate flags to the stadium. And, they'd have their regalia of whatever kind or whatever. And they would just stand there and scream, play Dixie, play Dixie.
But his father didn't give in.
We would get phone calls at the house, and we, had death threats at the house. We had bomb threats at the house. And at a certain point, my mom and dad could no longer sit with the band in the stands. They were given a seat up in the press box, and they actually had to have a police escort to go in and out of the stadium.
Growing up in Athens, Dance also attended Clark Central High School. He commends the actions of 3 of the first 5.
What's amazing to me is to think that those guys basically were part of the integrated Clark County high school, the first, and then to go and turn around and do it again at Georgia. I mean, oh my God, those were some men. I tell you what, those were some men.
And those men changed more than just football.
They definitely brought a sense of pride to the campus. Definitely.
Richard Morgan, charter member of the UGA Zeta Pi chapter of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and 1973 UGA graduate, remembers the first 5.
I think they were somebody to be revered, if I may use that term. If you saw one of them, you actually, it's almost a celebrity. You kind of wanted to just touch them and just, because you're so glad that the floodgates had opened up, so to speak. So that kind of made us feel very proud.
More black football players followed the first 5 throughout the 70s. So did Calvin Jones, not as a player, but in 1975 as UGA's first black assistant football coach. Jones was a Carver High School basketball coach. In his time there, he led his team to a historic 1967 state championship. During the first year, the Georgia High School Association allowed all black high schools to compete against all white and integrated high schools. Once at UGA, he often worked to recruit more black players, and more changes were coming.
If they had deep discussions, I have no recollection of it. I just remember that this is it, and we're moving forward.
Part of moving forward meant that in 1982, 11 years after the arrival of the first 5, Dance's father chose Harold Wright to become the first black UGA drum major. That same year, Herschel Walker became the first black Georgia Bulldog to win the Heisman.
I remember the first time I saw Herschel, I said to the guy sitting next to me, what's that lineman doing with the running backs? And he said, that's no lineman, that's our new phenom. Herschel, by himself, revolutionized how Georgia looked at athletics and football.
Half a century after the first 5 set foot on this gridiron, over half of the UGA football team is black players. Michael Thurman lived through it all, saw it all, and remembers it all.
You watch a Georgia football game, and you can't help but remember the time when there were no African Americans on the team, or it was one. And now when I get a chance to attend the game, I mean, even to this day, things have changed, but I've not forgotten what life used to be like and what the young men are and what they represent today.
Iconic victories and memorable moments. This field echoes with the names of dozens of young Black men who have followed in the first five's footsteps into this stadium and into the UGA football history books. Reporter Willie Danieli brings you their stories.
So I think with integration with the football team, with all student athletes, it broke down barriers. It sets a standard for campus. It sets a standard for the community.
The first five broke those barriers 50 years ago, and once they were down, for the next 5 decades, talented Black athletes followed to make their mark. Less than 10 years after the first five integrated the team, Herschel Walker left Wrightsville, Georgia for UGA. He joined the football team in 1980, and nearly 40 years later, he is still considered one of the greatest athletes to play for the Dogs.
I grew up in Wrightsville, Georgia, and Herschel came along years later. And it was such a terrific thing to be part of that team.
Lawrence Smith is a familiar name to Bulldog fans. He has extensive knowledge from serving as a sideline reporter for the Bulldogs football games for decades. As a historian for the UGA Bulldogs, he has seen some of the greatest moments in UGA history, and Walker is in quite a few of them.
You know, to the first five, I would like to say thank you. I would like to say thank you, and you're heroes. You're heroes because, you know, you're history in the making. And if it wasn't for you guys, Herschel Walker would have never existed.
According to Walker, had the first five not had the courage to lead the change, he wouldn't have been able to effect important changes of his own.
That was an old white gentleman trying to get to me. And you know, the state troopers were holding him back, and I said, no, it's fine, you know, I'm signing and stuff. And he came up to me, didn't even have a pen, didn't have anything. All he did is he grabbed my hand. He grabbed my hand and he said, Herschel, he said, I was one of the largest Klansmen here in the state of Georgia. And he said, but you changed me.
After Walker left his mark here in Sanford Stadium in the 80s, a consensus first-team All-American who played high school football in Folkston, Georgia, starred in Athens in the late 90s. Playing offense, defense, and special teams, Roland Champ Bailey was a force to be reckoned with on the field.
I grew up a Bulldog fan. I was always a Bulldog. And fortunate enough for me, my brother went to UGA first, and then I followed 3 years later.
Bailey graduated in 1998 and began his NFL career in Washington, D.C. Younger players who followed him to UGA watched his success and knew they could dream of their own. In the 2000s, Ben Watson was one of them.
If you had like a Champ Bailey sighting, you just went crazy because you're like, oh, he's back.
But even though it was almost 30 years after the first five integrated the football team, Watson says he still felt that he was held to a different standard.
The assumption was the only reason why I could be in class sitting next to you was because I was a good athlete. And that outside of that, I didn't really deserve to be there. Whereas I felt like my white teammates and counterparts could represent themselves as individuals, I felt like, you know, there was more of a burden on me to represent all of us.
Watson graduated from UGA in 2003 and went on to have a successful Super Bowl winning career, playing his final season with the New England Patriots. During a few of the years Watson played at Georgia in the 2000s, another player was making his mark. Bulldogs wide receiver Brian McClendon had the first five as role models, but he also had one more. His father, Willie McClendon, was also a Georgia Bulldog.
When I got there, it was like, oh man, you know, I mean, this is where my dad played, this is where my uncle played, this is where my mom went to school, you know. And so when I'm saying that, man, you got taught to kind of look up to the older guys. And it was the older guys' responsibility to show the younger guys kind of how things went. And that always gave you a sense of comfort, a sense of home and a sense of belonging, you know, just being a part of the team.
Half a century later in the 2020s, the legacy of the first five still influences even the most recent former Bulldogs.
To see guys like Sonny Michel, who were student athletes when I was here and now go on to do great things, that's what it's all about. You know, it brings you so much joy to see someone who's been in the program, invested in the program, did things the right way, and then they go on beyond Georgia and do great things.
Michelle, like many others, saw the legacy of the first five and walked over those barriers they broke down. all to now forge their own legacy.
You really want to find ways to honor them. The first thing you can do is we've got groups like the Circle of Honor, because you really want student athletes to appreciate where they came from and the people that have blazed the trail before them.
The Circle of Honor was designed to pay tribute to extraordinary student athletes and coaches at the University of Georgia whose actions brought honor to themselves or the university. Thanks to the first 5 black players for opening the door, succeeding at football, and life beyond football, the University of Georgia football team is building on that legacy year after year, decade after decade, for the past 50 years since the first 5 changed the face of football, even though some of the challenges that they faced are still seen today.
Going to the Buttsmere was really like our safe place. We would go to class. Like, I may be the only one of 2 or 3 black folks in my classes sometimes. But when I went to practice, or when I went to the meetings, went to the football building, it was something totally different.
The courage of the first 5 forever changed the face of UGA football, but it also changed their lives forever. Reporter Jessica Green shows you how the players took the lessons, hardships, and victories they experienced here and used them to make a difference in the rest of their lives.
When I walked off the field for the last time, I had a good career at the University of Georgia.
For Richard Appleby, Horace King, Chuck Kinnebrew, Clarence Pope, and Larry West,
those playing days at Georgia taught them valuable lessons.
And though they did not all pursue athletic careers, they would use those lessons for a lifetime. Appleby and King went straight to the NFL after college, and then into second careers. Kinnebrew, West, and Pope worked in management and public service roles. Richard Appleby left UGA to go pro.
1976 Tampa Bay, they drafted me in the 4th round. So I knew I would be going to play pro football. So that was my focus the minute I left the campus.
Appleby was drafted as a receiver, but Tampa Bay moved him to tight end, a change that he says limited his time on the field. He never played in a regular season game for the Buccaneers. In 1977, he signed with the British Columbia Lions in the Canadian Football League. He played 10 games over 2 seasons with the Lions as a tight end.
When it was time to leave football behind, Appleby says his transition was easy.
Football is a tough business. So once it was over, I really didn't have any regrets.
Next, Appleby made a move that even he didn't see coming. He opened his own business in Hawaii and has made it his home for the last 40 years. Appleby says he experienced discrimination growing up in Athens, but UGA taught him how to get along with everyone.
University of Georgia experience helped me to lose a lot of hate I had for other people.
Be ready. That's the mantra that carried Horace King through his senior year playing at newly integrated Clark Central High School, leading the desegregation of UGA football, and becoming the first African American from Georgia drafted to play in the NFL and beyond.
So I was getting out of college, and my first job was playing in the National Football League.
The Detroit Lions selected King in the 6th round of the 1975 NFL Draft. He played 9 seasons with the Lions. His best season was 1978,
when he started 15 games at fullback.
He averaged more than 4 yards per rush and gained more than 1,000 yards from scrimmage. He retired in 1983 with more than 2,000 career rushing yards and nearly 1,600 career receiving yards. And he was ready for what came next.
You know what NFL stands for? Not for long.
King was determined to have a plan to fall back on the day his football career would end. During every offseason, he worked and saved money.
Really, I was trying to establish and really just build a resume that I was a worker and was willing to work, that I wasn't just a football player.
But that didn't mean the end was easy.
You know, I played football from the time I was 15 until I was 32 years of age. That was a nice run. When I left, it was hard to accept, but it was time for me to leave. Parts of my body was telling me, oh, you probably need to let this job assignment go here. And it was the best thing to do.
Today, King enjoys his retirement from General Motors, where he worked in the engineering department for 24 years. Defensive lineman Chuck Kinnebrew realized in his sophomore season that he wasn't going to play pro ball after college. Instead, he focused more on getting his degree and looked to a career in coaching.
My intent was to be a coach in the SEC because they didn't have a lot of black coaches, and so I felt that there was a need there.
Kinnebrew says UGA football coach Vince Dooley helped him become a graduate assistant for the freshman team after graduation. His career path took an unexpected turn when a fellow UGA alumnus suggested he interview for a first-line supervisor position at DuPont.
I really didn't want to go. I wasn't interested in working. I had a game plan laid out, to go through the coaching process. I had support to do it. And went for an interview. They liked me. They asked me to come back.
In Kinnebrew's pivot to the business world, he found many similarities to athletics and coaching. His strong leadership capabilities would land him at corporations including Home Depot and Floor & Decor.
When I think about the success that I've had after football, a lot of it has been associated with the things that I learned during that 4-year period of time.
Today, Kinnebrew is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Floor & Decor. He was named to this title in July 2020, making him the first person ever to hold this position for the company. He plans to retire soon. In retirement, Kinnebrew plans to find a nonprofit to contribute to and visit the university more.
I'm extremely proud to be a Georgia Bulldog.
Clarence Pope takes great pride, too, in his role as one of the first 5.
I see it as a blessing. My name goes down in history. And so, me and others. And I'm really thankful, about that.
After leaving UGA in 1974, Pope says he struggled with bouts of depression. The next year, he went to work at a textile mill and re-enrolled at the university. In 1976, Pope joined the Athens Fire Department.
That job connected me with, who I really was, in my spirit, who I thought I was.
Pope enjoyed the work because it allowed him to help others. But over time, he says the death and tragedy he saw regularly got to him. In 1992, he walked off the job after 16 years. Pope says his life spiraled out of control from there. He even experienced homelessness.
If I would have continued, I would have died. And of course, but I came to that point where, making a decision whether you want to live or die. And I made a decision that, I want to live.
Pope says he went to counseling and prayed about returning to the fire department.
Spirit says, go back and talk with the chief. Boy, I didn't want to do that. Some of the hardest things that you have to do is just reveal yourself. And so when I went back, talked to the chief, he absolutely draped his arms around me and cried.
Pope earned his job back as a rookie and worked his way back to his former ranks. He served for 20 more years before retiring. But that retirement meant answering another call.
In that journey, I was called into the ministry. In that journey, family came back and united with my family. So, I've been blessed. You know what I mean? I look back over the years and I look at how, life fell apart, but just because. And I always say by the grace of God that I was surrendered.
Pope is now the associate pastor here at New Freedom Christian Center in Athens. He looks forward to ministering to athletes one day and continuing the legacy of the first 5.
What I want to be known for is, he was willing to serve,
Larry West was a successful defensive back at UGA, but when the Pro Scouts came around, West told them he was not interested.
To this day, I have no idea why I let those words come out of my mouth. Except every game, there was not a game that we played that I didn't play hurt. And I was tired of being physically hurt.
He didn't know it while he was still playing ball, but those words would spark the journey leading him to his dream career. West says he didn't have a plan, so when Rose's Stores Incorporated, a retail company, offered him a job on the spot that paid nearly $10,000 a year, West says he thought he was rich. West and his family moved, and he became the first African American in management for Rose's Stores Incorporated in Statesboro, Georgia.
It was totally different. Totally different, to say the least.
After 6 months at Rose's, West moved on to various executive jobs at Milliken & Company, and ultimately his past was one link that led him to his destiny, the ministry.
The Lord has been preparing me for years to do what I'm doing now. And I now know why I told the professional scouts that I didn't want to play.
Today, West is senior pastor at Mount Airy Baptist Church in Washington, D.C.
And I never would have been in the assignment that I am now, which is pastoring perhaps the greatest people this side of heaven. I'm absolutely grateful that he has allowed me to fulfill that destiny. I'm in the dream job of my lifetime. And the University of Georgia helped prepare me for it.
50 years since the first five set foot on campus, they still play a vital role in defining what UGA football is. Their resilience, leadership, and progress is a tough act to follow, but they are ready to share. And as Southern Grit shows you, today's players are ready to learn.
Look where you are now and say, would I be here if these guys hadn't trailblazed for me in front of them?
On February 25th, 2020, a group of University of Georgia football players sat quietly in this room. Coach Kirby Smart had called them here to meet 4 UGA football legends, bringing these young players lessons from a difficult past.
It's 50 years later that we want to come and share some stuff to you, because you're going to fall on some hard challenges, but you can be able to overcome them, okay?
Clarence Pope knows a thing or two about overcoming hardships. 50 years later, he and Chuck Kinnebrew, Horace King, and Larry West are back on the UGA campus to visit family.
Family has always been important to me. The University of Georgia is a family to me. We all wore the red and black and played for it.
4 of the first 5 players back to counsel today's team members. The Pioneers visit, speaking volumes to the younger members about what it means to be a part of this football family.
Coming back shows how much they care. They were kind of laughing, making jokes with us and all that. And they kept it as blunt and as real as possible in terms of what they had to go through and how we got it easy now.
Lewis Seen, a junior defensive back, knows his experience on the team is far different than that of the first 5s.
You could only imagine how it was back then for them being the first 5, and they were black. That was a hard time for them, but now to see that the whole team is majority black, they were happy to see that.
That happiness was appreciated in this room, but so were the difficult lessons shared.
They were just grateful just to have other people that look like them on the team, and that's something I take for granted, honestly.
The first 5, able to make change on the Georgia football team 50 years ago, after head coach Vince Dooley decided it was time.
Coach Dooley, he said, I'll promise you one thing, and that is that I'll treat you just as if you were my own son. And that statement grabbed me.
Today, head coach Kirby Smart follows in Coach Dooley's footsteps.
It doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, what the color of your skin is. He's going to treat you equally.
I feel like he treats us as a son. He wants to see us all succeed.
That drive for success extends beyond what happens here in Sanford Stadium on game days. Following the social unrest during the summer of 2020, Smart canceled practice to give team members time, a safe space, and an open mic to talk about the issues. And he brought back these players who changed the face of Georgia football forever.
They've seen a lot of different things, so bringing them back into the fold has been incredible. Who better to learn from than somebody that's experienced that firsthand?
Just having that conversation, that deep conversation that sometimes may be uncomfortable, knowing that those conversations can change someone's life.
Player Kyrus Jackson honors the First Five's legacy today by serving in the SEC Football Leadership Council, SEC Council on Racial Equity and Social Justice, and UGA Athletics Board of Directors.
And I feel like what we've been doing at the University of Georgia, having these small sessions where we can get together as a team, as a family, and have those uncomfortable conversations and unite as one.
The First Five's legacy, they're coming back to visit family, to coach and teach lessons that will serve these players long after they leave UGA, matters to these young men.
Nobody tell them to come play ball here. For them to want to do that and them possibly not knowing then the type of impact they was going to have now, I just tell them I'm thankful.
That gratitude matters to the men who took that first step 50 years ago.
I want to be remembered as the first 5 that went in and we made a big difference. We made a difference.
A difference these young men appreciate.
They've obviously laid the groundwork for people who look like me to just come through just UGA and to do what we want to do.
Just as the 2 simple words, "Go Dogs," express the sentiment of the entire Bulldog Nation. 2 more simple words express the sentiment of today's players toward the first 5.
I would just like to say thank you to them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2020 saw a summer of civil unrest, racial protests, and hundreds of thousands of deaths due to a once-in-a-century global pandemic. But, as the first 5's experiences illustrate, where there is pain, there can be progress. Jayla Johnson shows you how this past year has changed how today's team members are working together to produce new and important plays, and not just on the gridiron.
From Douglas County, Georgia, to Atlanta and other cities across America, the world witnessed protests like these in 2020.
Mike Brown, Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor. Yell them out, Sandra Bland, you keep saying it. But that's all I've seen. All I know is traumatic instances.
People demanding justice. For the Black community, this was familiar territory.
Our voices won't be silent. Our voices won't be silent.
For others, it became a pivotal moment, a call to action for some society influencers, including several University of Georgia football players. Wide receiver Kinnebrew Jackson is one of them.
Like myself, I feel like I can have an effect and a change on their lives by being at the University of Georgia, because they can all cheer for me on Saturdays, but feel some type of way for me off the field. So if I can express my thoughts to them off the field and let them know how I really feel about something, maybe it can cause change and maybe it will have an effect on somebody else's life.
As players and coaches expressed their thoughts on social media, the activism began to extend rapidly beyond individuals to moments like this in September 2020, when UGA football coach Kirby Smart and members of the team marched across UGA's campus to show support for the African American legacy that has shaped the campus for the last 60 years.
First and foremost, me being a minority coach, father, a husband, and the things that were going on, I felt like it was my duty to kind of educate and share my experiences with the team. And also, it allowed our guys to feed off my input and for them to voice how they felt, their true feelings. And things are still kind of in the same boat, but it's definitely improved. But with the recent social media and social injustices and police injustice and having police reform needed, then 50 years is not that long.
A lot of people notice it, but they're afraid to talk about it. And for one, if you want to solve a problem, if you want solutions to a problem, you got to talk about the problem.
And this method became exactly what the team used to address this issue.
Well, I think our players have been tremendous. Our players have given us so much to think about, and we relied on a lot of people outside the program. We spoke with different folks, and it was good to hear them tell us listening is probably the most important thing.
As they absorbed the information, the process of understanding could begin.
In which our Black African American coaches did a tremendous job of helping our kids, both black and white, understand what was going on. And every player we have looks at things from a different perspective. And I think that's what we learned is like be open to other perspectives and listen more than you talk. And that was a big piece for us.
From understanding came action. UGA football coach Cortez Hankton helped launch the Dogs for Pups program as an Athens-Clarke County community service initiative.
With words, you got to have intent, and from the intent, now action has to take place. What can we do? It literally started like that. What can we do? And I remember just kind of sitting there because I was at home, sitting on the couch, we were on Zoom, and I remember sitting there, I'm like, man, what would be awesome if we're really trying to impact the youth of our community. Why they're our pups. Why not call it Dog for Pups?
With the desire to create a fundraising initiative for youth impacted by COVID-19, the team brainstormed its first project, And they didn't have to look far to find the inspiration.
We're nice here, but right down the street, we're talking about one of the most impoverished counties, not just in the state of Georgia, but in the nation. And it's sad, And so, what can we do to help? Kids are going to be at home with no access to internet to even do the things that are necessary to get educated. And so it all started there, the internet drive. And this is how the guys understood how powerful it is to use their platform.
With the help of the Bulldog community, the team raised $100,000 to assist 1,200 families in their first initiative. A year has passed since the activism of last summer and community initiatives over the season. But some players, such as Matthew Brown, say the push for social justice needs to continue.
Number one mission that we have to do, we have to just get away from a society that has occasional protest every time something tragic happens, where we need to just become more aware and become more educated and just become more present, and to understand that we need to become a society with just consistent and constant change.
The change that began with these 5 men 50 years ago.
These 5 men, we're talking about, that broke the color barrier and dealt with integration. So bringing them back into the fold has been incredible from perspective-wise, because they can sit and talk to our players, and our players may say, hey, your generation didn't get it fixed. We're trying to get it fixed, but they also have respect that these guys went through a lot tougher times than maybe they did.
But that doesn't mean more change isn't needed. Matthew Brown hopes to see it come.
Because that's the only way we're going to see just a better society where everybody respects one another and where we're not going to have these problems. And I believe that once everybody understands that, I hope things will change.
Change.
No, don't worry about the creed, the national origin, or their color. Just take them as individuals, as human beings.
It's not easy.
We don't run from things. We stay and we deal with them.
But through their pain, purpose, and perseverance.
Do it all with a twinge of love.
These men led the way.
Oh, we look at it 50 years later and we see the fruit.
The first 5.
You have to be willing to give people a chance.
Appleby's gonna throw a bomb. And was named most valuable defensive lineman.
Junior tailback Horace King hauls it in for a 45-yard touchdown.
Larry West, number 38 for Georgia, steps in front of it, makes a nice interception.
This program was made possible in part thanks to funding from the University of Georgia Athletic Association and the Dean's Excellence Fund at UGA's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication.